Alrighty, so week 2 behind us and week 3 ahead of us. It is Friday, my normal process that I do, which is I grade the week 2, the week that I'm currently in, right? And I give you feedback, and then I record a video just kind of summarizing like what some of the stuff that I saw, and then kind of what's heading at you. So a couple things before I start into that process is that I just want to say this, and I probably said this somewhere, but I just think it's worth saying again for whatever reason. You probably won't know the difference, but I don't want you to know, is that this, for Python this semester, I'm using content I produced last semester. The first time I taught Python, so I went through and recorded videos and set up assignments. And so this semester, I'm just using that content, of course, grading, giving you feedback, doing these videos just to keep in touch with you, because every semester students' experiences are going to be different based on their collective experience levels. So for my JavaScript class, I'm recording new content there, and only the second semester I've been teaching 2 programming languages in one semester. I'm not going to lie, it's a little bit of a challenge to contextually move between the 2 languages at times. So today, what I did is I reviewed the code that I wrote for the week 2, and I thought of it in terms of what I saw as really good examples that you all wrote for your approaches. So I just want to say the following, right? And I want you to actually give this some thought, because for people that have been programming for a little while, when somebody presents you a problem, right, or a list of requirements like I do on the Learn Togethers, and then I give you a video for going over that, like the approach that you take to actually write code that achieves the desired output will vary based on your experience level, right? If you have had some programming experience, even if it's not with Python, you generally have learned a logical way of thinking through and breaking down things into their logical units, right? Like do this, accomplish this, and then do this part. So when I was reading again through my instruction for the Learn Together for week 2, it was like one of the things I felt like now looking at it, I could have done was like, where I was asking for user input, right? I could have been more specific. There's actually an input command, and I was talking about how what kind of data comes back after you run that input command. And then I was talking about right, setting an interval of those things and then running a loop for that, as well as I did some data validation. So again, depending on your level, the level that you bring in. And I guess the thing I want to say is that if it is a challenge to you to do some of this work, that's actually good. Okay. And not that it can feel good. It really can feel like a huge challenge. Like challenges can feel varying ways as well. When somebody challenges you with something, it can bring up nervousness. It can bring up, your own thoughts about yourself and doubting maybe your own ability, which also does not help you to focus. So there's a varying types of responses you can get to something like this. And the thing I want to tell you is that the more you do it, right? And that's why I structure this course the way I do, the better you're going to get at it. And and here's really the thing I'm trying to say, and I actually said this in my JavaScript class today too, is like, if you're not giving yourself that time to first understand what's being asked of you, and then to really attempt to write code on your own to accomplish that. Now, for this week, I actually ended up telling you it's okay to go find, for at least the prime number one, some code, right? And even then, when you look at somebody else's code, you really should take the time to understand what it's doing. and most of you did this. You gave a reference. You actually gave, here's what I looked at. So these are important processes. But back to my point, if you are not taking the time to actually attempt to write this code, right? Again, it's hard for me to know what your process is, right? Do you spend is it that you're not maybe having some challenges with understanding what's being asked? Hopefully the videos help with that. And then trying to translate that into how do I write code? And again, it's not necessarily easy, right? But the more you do it, the easier we'll get. So I'm going to provide a link today to how to think like a programmer from Free Code Camp. If you don't know about Free Code Camp, they're awesome. It's basically like a coding boot camp, free online. They do have a Python section, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, data science. I mean, the amount of content they have these days is amazing. So I'm going to give this link. But more than anything, what I want you to do in your reply today is I want you to, as much as you can, talk about, just doesn't have to be long, it could be a sentence or two, but how do you approach, first understanding the problem? Of course, reading it is good, right? And then how do you approach the part where you're actually writing code to handle that output that you're being requested to create? Because that's the other part of this, right? Is actually making sure, because writing code's one thing, getting correct output is the goal. So if you're just writing the code without spending the time to make sure your code's running, again, it's not the intent. Remember, the intent of this class is that 3 times this semester, and your first one's coming up in week 6, and I believe I talk about it either in next week's or the weeks after. I talk about the requirements of what you're going to need to do. And so that process, if you're only doing that as you approach week 6, it's going to feel like a mountain versus maybe a hill, okay? And here's the other thing is get help. Be willing to ask for help. Be willing, and there's a good conversations happening out on Discord. I appreciate those discussions, and all of you have been wonderful who have contributed to those discussions, right? So again, that's what I want to see in your reply today. So in general, I saw some really good code examples. I can generally read somebody's code and know, or if I don't, you will see me do this, I will ask. And if you see this, try not to have a feeling of that you have to defend it. I just want to know, because I'm just getting to know you, is I might ask, did you write all this code yourself? And generally the reason I ask that is if I don't see a reference to something that feels like it wouldn't be part of a beginner's toolkit to understand how to do certain things, I will probably ask. Okay, so as we move into week 3, right, our code along, in addition to the sections with automate the boring stuff, the other thing I've asked you to write is another file related to the library, the cut and paste. And I will tell you, I think coming at us in week 5, I do something called setting up environments. And I saw Andrew Andrew in our class already does this. And this is a place, just kind of a little foreshadowing what's coming at you. Because when you install something on your system, right? And what I mean by this is when you're coding, it is a very, very common practice to use a library from that somebody else has written and include that in your code base. And when you do that, there are so many reasons why you would want to kind of wrap your hands around that code that you're bringing in and have it only be within a certain confined area. And we call that, actually, we call that different kinds of things, but in our case, we'll call it, right, creating an environment, virtualization. And by the way, virtualization was why I hesitated. It can mean a lot of different things depending on if you're working in the network space or running virtualized computers. But in our case, we're just creating environments that contain that external code. Now, again, you don't have to do that. not again, but for week 3 code long, that's not necessary for you to do. I just want you to know I hesitate installing things on my system more than I have to. I think there was a discussion out on Discord about this, about the GitHub client on the Mac side didn't have a clear install. And I believe Andrew was saying he uses Homebrew. I don't. I typically like to keep my system minimized. I just do that. If I don't have to use something like Homebrew, I don't. But again, this is where the more you're around people who do this kind of work, we tend to be really opinionated. Okay, just kind of the way it is. So then for next week, we're going to take the concepts that we've learned, right? And you're going to write functions, right? And this is, again, one of those fundamental skills of, because we've written now, I believe, is functions next week? Now I got to go look. Oh, no, I actually don't think it is. No, it must not be yet. I'm actually confused. See, I'm confusing this with my JavaScript class. So you're going to write a very common code, a very common approach, a very common problem that's asked very commonly, almost too commonly, but I thought it's good to do it. And again, give it that time, right? Read through the problem, see what you're trying to do. And actually, no, it looks like I do write this, otherwise return the same number, right? Oh, yeah. Yep, I do. So I was right. It is function this week. But in this case, we're writing functions that do 2 different things, one very specific and one more just giving you some time to start, venturing out, because you're going to need to think about what kind of code, or what's the concept you're going to be writing code to accomplish. Okay, I think that's it. I'll give you this link to how to think like a programmer. I will say, as I've said with all of my classes today, because I think it's interesting, whitehouse.gov. Of course, we have a new administration. That's not what I'm here to talk about. If you right-click Inspect and run down, go into the head section, you will see that there is a message, as if you're reading this: we need your help building back better. And my point here is that, this is a good skill to learn. Not necessarily plugging going to work for the government, but a good job probably. I work for state government, so, I've also worked for local government, so I understand that sometimes and I've worked for private industry, so I've worked across the different types, at least the major types of industry, and I've worked on my own as a consultant. So what's my point about that? My point about that is this is a good skill base to have. You're learning a very popular program. We talked about this last week, the idea of popular programming language, Python right now. So, it's a good skill base to level up. And it does take moving beyond. We're introducing you to some concepts, giving you some experiences of writing code. This is like everything else in life. You have to really pick it up and take it to the next level with your own self-determination, your own sense of importance, and your own sense of discipline. So I just try to help give you a structure to help foster those if you don't already have them. Many of you probably already have these skills, which is awesome. So as a last thing, what I ask in the attendance for this week was really about, talking about your approach to how, once you read something and you write code, what is your approach to doing that, right? And do you feel you give it the time it needs? Right? And if you're not, what I want you to know is that you're not helping yourself to actually write code for the 3 dev projects. But I totally understand why, and especially in the world that we live, it's easy to go find somebody else's implementation of something rather than to write your own, but it won't help you build that muscle. I shouldn't say it won't help you, because I think there is some benefit. That's the other thing, is like, that's the other part of this is, venturing off into other areas, but there is definitely a benefit to reading once you've written something, somebody else's way to approach it, especially somebody that's got more experience, because sometimes A, it's just trying to understand what they've done, but B, it's really also looking at the way they approached it. And that there's just so much good that comes out of that. But if you're only doing that and not doing the other, you're not going to grow your skill base the way you want as quickly. Just my opinion. All right, have a great weekend. Talk to you later.